Here to join us as we dig into this topic on thinking dimensionally is Stephanie Russell, RKD Group's new EVP of Strategy and Decision Science. Hey, Stephanie, what's up?
Hey, Justin. Hey, Kate. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I'm sure it's been a long morning so far for you both, but excited to pivot a little bit and talk about dimensions.
Yes. We want to talk about what your favorite dimension is.
Ooh. Can I think on that a little bit? Let's come back around.
That's fine.
Yeah, we'll give you a few minutes and we'll start somewhere else. For those of us who maybe didn't get to listen to your episode with Justin and Ronnie on the Thinkers podcast, you talked a little bit about advanced analytics and the role they play in understanding our donors and the context of our donors. So can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. I think one of the great things from the Compass, it talked a little bit about this concept of RFM, which is recency, frequency, monetary value, which is just a tried and true staple of fundraising and nonprofit marketing, right? So, and it's not to say that doesn't have value, but as we think about increasingly how we engage in digital platforms and how we think about the relevant things that we see, all of the back end of that is machine learning based, call it AI, right? Predictive analytics that is multivariate. And so the opportunity as we think across not just digital marketing and fundraising, but also some of our offline channels, which are very much alive and well, in particular in the direct mail space, thinking about being multidimensional and multivariate and using analytics to really help create that balance. I think we have these stories that we tell ourselves about who our donors are, right? They're direct mail or they're digital, or they are of a certain generation or they are not. And the reality is we are all very sort of complex individuals. Don't tell him I said this, for example, my husband, big defensive end football guy, he drives a minivan and he loves it, right? I do not drive the minivan, even though I'm the, arguably the soccer mom, right? So you always want to make assumptions about kind of who you think people are, but if we sort of weigh all the different attributes about them and allow analytical tools to kind of help determine the relative weighting and importance of those on a one-to-one basis, it creates a lot of power for us as fundraisers in terms of targeting and personalization and suppression, in terms of who we choose not to target, particularly when we've got a 50 cent per impression type of decision that we're making.
There's so many untapped pieces of data. I'm almost tired. We've used the word data so much today. There's so many untapped pieces of context around people when they engage with a nonprofit. So for instance, you mentioned your husband who's the football fan, but drives the minivan, right? It could even be that the time of day in which you make a donation says something about the context of who you are in that moment. So Justin in the morning versus Justin in the middle of the day versus Justin in the late afternoon versus Justin in the evening. It's still the same Justin. It's that the context around how I'm engaging with a particular cause in that moment changes. So how do we move forward on tapping into context?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first part of it is probably what you just spent the last hour talking about, right? Which is capture and connect those dots, right? Sort of make sure we have the tools and tech to be able to take them in. I think for some fundraisers that presents an opportunity to allow tech and data to enable us, not constrain us. So, that's really the first piece. And then just, figuring out what those signals are and how they work together. And again, that's where leveraging analytics, which are now so much more inherent in a lot of our platforms and processes, because it's, it is the time of day, and Justin on a Saturday is probably even a lot more, sort of different in terms of the context versus Justin on a weekday, and allowing the machines to help sort of understand and do the learning and the heavy lifting for us, I think is hugely powerful. So, kind of getting our system set up in a way that allow us to take those things in and feed into analytical models and then make decisions about, serving the next impression or what we bid on it, or if you're selected right for the next kind of multi-touch, 50 cents per impression direct mail stream is really critical.
You've got a couple of decades worth of advanced audience-centric marketing that you're bringing into this role. And so, a month-ish in, What impressions do you have right now about what you've seen in the landscape and what the first next step forward should be?
Yeah. I think what I've seen is there's a lot of interest in sort of being more innovative and more thoughtful and analytically driven in what we do, for sure. I think there's just a lot of history and comfort with the way we've done things, and and all of our clients are comfortable doing things. And I think in particular, the one thing that has struck me is a very sort of clear delineation of how we think about channels or media, right? So folks are either direct mail donors or they are digital donors. I sort of let off with that. And I think challenging some of that thinking as being the tip of the spear for how we plan and think about orchestrating experiences, the first thing I would push and challenge us as an industry to really turn upside down. As well, I think, Justin, you've heard me say this a few times, even just the word digital, I think in the context of fundraising 10 years ago, meant something very different than what it means today. So even just thinking about when we find ourselves using that word digital, to get a little bit more specific, right? Because there's so many touch points, right? Email, site, app, landing pages, paid media, and inside of paid media, there's so many components, right? You guys were talking social earlier, obviously search and programmatic display and video, all the things. So really starting to both challenge those fundamental silos we tend to think, and also plan and frankly organize ourselves and our teams in, I think is a big piece of it. And then also then further breaking down as we think about digital and the role that plays. For example, I was just doing some research in terms of some client experience, very thoughtful, a lot of like outbound things that are all happening in concert, but they're not quite connected, right? So that you can sort of tell as a constituent that the experience was planned in a little bit of a silo in terms of, is the pull through of the promise of the $50 donation that gets a specific thing happening on the landing page when I'm then asked to give $100? Right? Not quite, right? So thinking about sort of some of the details of how those experiences tie together across the different pieces. And also not assuming I'm going to be a digital donor or a direct mail donor, and starting to think about that fluidity across. That was a really long-winded answer. Sorry.
It's okay. My mind just went to, in what other context of life would you be considered like through the lens of purely a channel? And I can't wrap my mind around how any other sector would think of someone as, Justin is only going to order from the app. He's never going to walk into Starbucks and get his Venti Americano, right? Like those sorts of aspects that, I don't know, Kate, it's that started to swirl in my mind.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Pivoting here a little bit into the growth model, how does all of this kind of play into that?
Well, I think it's, there's steps we can take to start to break down, right, our internal silos, as fundraisers, and also our thinking to help chip away at, the things that hold us back from creating a really powerful integrated experience that will drive growth. So, and, to the prior hour, there's a lot of tech and data enablement that have to work in concert with that. So, starting to think through the smaller steps of what we want to achieve as it relates to behaving in a more cross-channel way, and then ultimately in an omni-channel way. It's just starting with the details of, thinking about flighting things together, always thinking about that landing experience with any outbound touch, and starting to flight your creative assets accordingly. I think we tend to let our landing pages be static, as opposed to, if you can get someone to click or scan that QR code on their direct mail piece, like that's 90% of the battle. And we tend to invest most of our time on that part of the experience, forgetting that the pull through of that inbound piece of it is just as important to kind of pull through the promise you're making in that direct mail piece or that digital ad. So that's one I would always put on the top of the list in terms of, hey, let's start to get better at that. And that's just a planning and a workflow and sort of a little bit of a reset in terms of the importance of our creative assets to think about. There's probably very little tech and data that we have to do, right? But as we sort of take each individual step, it's having the next things kind of teed up that we know we want to work through. to just continue in that maturity and ultimately the goal being to drive growth.
You hinted at this idea of driving growth, and I'll share with the audience a big part of what Stephanie is doing is helping frame what it looks like in terms of approach, a systematic approach that is step by step, right? To be able to enable and propel growth for the organizations that we work with. And it's super exciting because it definitely starts with the end in mind, right? Which is an individual organization's performance ceiling and floor versus just comparing across all landscapes to say, like, here's, benchmark, and then plots out step by step, which is I think sometimes the missing part. We get too fixated on that in place and forget the next rung of the ladder.
Right. Yeah. We want to be omni-channel and generative AI driven, and it's going to be great. Right. But the from here to there is really complicated. So our goal is to look across sort of the capabilities of what good fundraising looks like and break it down and set, to your point, more realistic kind of start and end places, and really just be able to stair step into some of those, kind of blocking and tackling improvements.
You've had some conversations with folks early on in organizations that we work with. How are they receiving this idea of leveraging this step-by-step process over a multi-year term to enable their growth?
I think the feedback so far has been really good and positive, and people are excited. I think all of us in the kind of client and agency context are just looking for collaboration and thought leadership and the opportunity to be strategic. So I talk a lot about the forest from the trees. So I think anytime, we as the agency and our clients are taking that deliberate step to have a forest from the trees conversation, it's fun. It's the cool stuff about the work that we do. And I think everybody enjoys kind of thinking a little bit bigger picture. Not to say that the details of the day-to-day aren't critically important, because obviously they are, but it is really, I think, both important and energizing to take a beat and step back a little bit. And part of the objective of the growth model and how we think about it is to challenge us to do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie, for your time. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Great to talk to everybody.
Thanks,
Enjoy the rest of the day.
Good to see you.
Bye.